We're SPG, a research organisation that aims to create more sustainable practices in the arts. Our projects intersect at different stages of the artwork lifecycle. One of the areas we aim to impact is the commissioning process through a series of action research projects. Informed by the findings of the Floating Head project, we began to implement the research deeper, taking a present-day example, an existing art festival, to explore how we could work with an artist and artwork to secure a permanent site and use for it beyond the festival's running date. We work with a long-term collaborator, Jackie Donachie, on the project.
The artwork step came about through a commission that was, a commission or a project that was going to be included in Glasgow International Festival of Visual Art. So as part of, which is called GI. So as part of GI, they were offering commission grants for artists to submit proposals for part of the programme that's called Across the City. And I had, for quite a few years, wanted to do a big public work for GI, partly because I think it's quite an important part of the festival. People come to Glasgow. I kind of like it that it's a time where people make an effort to get out and about and to see artworks. It's only on for 2 weeks, so it's quite a good time to do something that's temporary, and also a really nice opportunity to get people to a part of Glasgow that they hadn't been to before. So that was kind of really, all of that was going on, as well as wanting to make objects. And I wanted to do it as part of GI. So when they were offering these Across the City grants for artists, I put in a proposal. So we didn't get the biggest one, but we got one of them. I got one of them. And it was to make a project that I think right from the start was called STEP. And it was to look at how we deal with some of the Victorian architecture of Glasgow. It was a very wealthy city. So the city centre was built at a time of great wealth, which has now been questioned where that wealth came from. But it also it's a really difficult city to navigate if you have any access needs. And that seems like such a basic thing, but like as soon as you've either pushed a pram or a wheelchair around Glasgow, it's very, very difficult. It's hilly. All these Victorian buildings have big steps to the entrance. So, and then you start to get into the whole conservation thing of what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And also this whole idea of an art festival that happens in temporary spaces. So you sort of maybe don't always need to stick to the rules that are set out for public buildings. So people kind of put their fingers in their ears and say, it's only for 2 weeks and isn't it an amazing space? And then they also have to say, I'm really sorry, you can't come in, which is terrible. I mean, that's just not acceptable in this day and age, but it's hard. I accept that it's hard to kind of say that some spaces aren't possible to use. But I think we're at a point now that you do have to say that. And so what I wanted to do for the project for GI was to do something that kind of raised all that and questioned people's attitudes to temporary spaces that get used for cultural events such as GI, but not only GI. So that manifested itself in a series of concrete blocks. So the journey to get to the concrete blocks came about through, I went round, I chose a couple of buildings that have been used for events or that might be used for events, like the Kelvin Hall, the Royal College of Surgeons, which is in Glasgow City Centre. There was an artist going to be working in there. And I just went round and measured all the entrances and counted the steps and looked at the access that these places had. And from those measurements, I work with an architect sometimes who does these drawings with me. So we kind of modelled what for some of the entrances that didn't have any ramps, that were really unusable because of the number of steps. We drew up these models of what a ramp would look like. And in some cases, it's quite an ordinary looking ramp, like for the Procurator, the Royal Faculty of Procurators, which is in Nelson Mandela Place in Glasgow. It's got 2 entrances. One's got like 3 big stone steps and one's got about 10 big stone steps. And they were really nice and went to visit them. And they were saying, we've got the money to make a conversion, but the city won't let us do it because, where would you put the ramp? And there's all sorts of questions. So in the end, I narrowed it down to 3 spaces, that 2 in the city centre, and the third one was Queen's Park Railway Club, which is a much loved art gallery run by artists that's in the waiting room of Queen's Park train station, which is run by ScotRail. But in order to get to that, you have to go down about 60 steps on either side. There's these two great big flights of stairs. And I know ScotRail are working their way round to get rid of, to put in lifts, but that's a particularly difficult one because of where the trains come and go and the age of the station. So Queen's Park Railway Club was another one of the venues, and it was nothing against them because I spoke to them about it. It was just this fact of the number of stairs that are there. And so that produced this really beautiful drawing, because of course you would need a ramp that was like about 8 miles long to accommodate that number of stairs, so you couldn't possibly make that in real life. So that was modelled on a much smaller scale in the gallery, made out of aluminium. It looks quite like a dagger. But the two of the sort of 3 or 4 step entrances, I kind of made them in concrete, and that's where the relationship with Govan Project Space came in. Because when I was working on it, I'd started doing the measurements, and what I had wanted was an outdoor space that had a view of the city, like a vantage point where you could look at the city centre. I had originally been looking up near where my studio is here at Spears Wharf. There's another space up above the canal, and I'd spoken to some people there about doing it there, and it would be a lovely site to do sort of some evening events. And I liked the idea of a sculpture that was outside, that events could happen on or around, looking at the city. So the space at Spears Wharf fell through, and I kind of was a bit not sure how I was going to progress. And Alex and Matt, they hadn't submitted it. They didn't have a show for GI, and they were asking if I had been thinking of anything, and it just worked out very well. And also, I had said, well, not just the gallery, what about looking down at the graving docks? So we kind of went down and had a walk around, and it's just such an amazing site. So that was where we decided to work together, and the outdoor works were going to be sited in the graving docks. So I had to get permission for all of that because they're privately owned. And and what was quite the timing of it, because of the whole shutdown with COVID, which I'm sure we'll talk about. During COVID, the gates had just been the gates for a while had just been left open. There used to be stuff getting torched in the dock site all the time when it was gated, and people had to climb over a fence to get in. And for about 6 months before I even looked at working there, the owner had decided just to quietly unlock the gate, and people could come and go. So it became less kind of threatening. People were starting to use it a little bit to walk their dogs. And then during lockdown, it just became a place that local people went for walks. It's dangerous, but it's amazing. It's beautiful. So that's how the work came about.